I sat in the hospital corridor with a thin line of blood drying above my eyebrow. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. A nurse asked if I felt dizzy. I said no. My voice was steady. Too steady, considering the evening I had just lived through. Let me explain how I got here. It started 4 hours earlier on a quiet Sunday, April 14th, 6:40 p.m. I had set the table myself, the way I always did. Roast chicken, potatoes, 1 bottle of Merlot. I bought for $12. Nothing special. I wasn't celebrating anything. I just wanted a normal dinner with my son and his wife. Mark arrived first. He looked at me the way a mechanic looks at a broken engine, searching for faults. His wife, Laura, followed with that careful smile she used when she wanted something. They took their seats, but there was a tension around them, a stiffness I noticed right away. I should have seen the signs. They asked unusual questions. How I was sleeping, whether I ever got confused driving, if I remembered to pay my utility bill this month. I answered calmly, without emotion. Their eyes flicked to each other every time I responded clearly. But this was only the beginning. Halfway through dinner, Mark placed a thick folder on the table. He didn't do it casually. He set it down like a tool he planned to use. The paper inside shifted with a dull sound. My fork paused halfway in my mouth. I didn't speak. I didn't reach for it. I just watched. Laura folded her hands neatly in front of her. Too neatly. Her smile cracked slightly. That's when I realized something was wrong. Mark cleared his throat. He said he had noticed changes in me lately. He spoke in a soft voice people use when they think you're fragile. I listened without interrupting. Silence is a thing people underestimate. It forces them to reveal more. He leaned forward. His face tightened. He said, we needed to talk about my health. He told me something was happening to my mind, and it couldn't wait. Mark leaned back slightly, as if easing into a role. He had practiced. His voice softened in a rehearsed way. He said he had noticed signs. Forgetfulness, slow reactions, small episodes. I listened without interrupting. I let his words hang between us like steam from the food on the table. I should have seen the signs. Laura folded her hands again. She said she had been worried for months. She described moments that never happened. Keys I supposedly misplaced, names I confused, dates I forgot. All invented, all delivered with a trembling tone meant to sound sincere. I kept my breathing slow. Calmness unsettles people who expect panic. Mark opened the folder. The papers inside were arranged too neatly to be spontaneous. Tabs, colored marks, printed forms. This wasn't concern. This was preparation. But this was only the beginning. He slid one page toward me. He didn't push it fully. Just enough for me to see a heading. Supportive decision assistance. I recognized the phrase. I'd seen it a month earlier while searching legal terms. It wasn't supportive. It was a controlled transfer authority. Laura leaned closer. She said I didn't need to worry. She said they just wanted things to be easier. The way she said easier made it sound like a cage with cushions inside. That's when I realized something was wrong. Mark asked if I remembered conversation from 2 weeks ago. I did, word for word, but he retold it differently. In his version, I repeated myself. In his version, I hesitated. In his version, he saved me from confusion. Silence became my strongest tool. He kept talking, trying to fill it. He said they had spoken to a specialist. He didn't say the name. He didn't mention that specialists in dementia don't prepare legal documents. But the slip was enough. Laura shot him a quick glance, the kind of glance people give when someone says too much. I should have seen this coming. Mark placed a second document in front of me. This one was thicker. Financial authorizations, account oversight, property management, all written in polite language, all designed to move control away from me. I watched the papers without touching them. I watched their eyes. I watched the tension building beneath their calm expressions. But this was only the beginning. Laura said they wanted to protect me. She said I deserved peace. She said it in a voice that belonged to a person hiding a plan behind the word love. Mark tapped the folder lightly. A signal. A push. He said there were things I should sign. Not could. Should. His tone slipped for a moment, revealing the frustration underneath. I leaned back in my chair. Slowly, deliberately, their eyes followed every movement, searching for any sign of hesitation, any sign they could use. Mark exhaled with impatience. He said we needed to handle all of this soon, ideally tonight. The room grew still, heavy, expectant. He pushed the final page toward me. He said it was time to make decisions before your condition gets worse. Mark folded his hands and lowered his voice, as if preparing to deliver a diagnosis I was too weak to hear. He said he didn't want to frighten me, but he believed I was showing early cognitive decline. The words came out slowly, like he wanted them to sound medical. I kept my breathing even. Laura nodded in perfect sync with him. She said she had noticed episodes, small pauses, misplaced items, repeated questions. None of it was true, but she said it with such gentle certainty that someone else might have doubted their own memory. I should have seen this coming months ago. Mark tapped the documents again. He explained that the first set would let them assist me with financial decisions. He said banks could be complicated. Bills could be confusing. Mistakes could be costly. This wasn't care. This was strategy. He moved to the second page. Property oversight. A neat, clean paragraph stating they could manage the house in case of diminishing capacity. I recognized the phrasing immediately. This wasn't something they wrote. This was something a lawyer crafted deliberately. But this was only the beginning. Laura leaned forward, her palms flat on the table. She said they had talked about this for a long time. She said they had discussed long-term plans, things families must face sooner or later. The way she said long-term plans made something cold settle in the room. I watched their faces. I watched the certainty in their eyes. They believed their own script. Mark said they loved me. He said this would protect the family. He said I shouldn't be offended. Each sentence was a lock placed quietly around me. I stayed silent. Silence is a mirror. People project their intentions into it. Mark took that silence as invitation. He placed the pen directly in front of me, not next to the papers, directly in front of my hand. He said they needed me to sign before the end of the month. He said it calmly, but his foot tapped under the table. The impatience was slipping through. That's when I understood their real motivation. Not fear for my health. Fear of losing access. Laura looked at Mark, then at me, her smile widening just enough to feel rehearsed. She said this was the right thing. She said a responsible man would understand. I simply folded my hands. No reaction. No words. They waited for something. Hesitation, confusion, surrender. But they misread me. Mark leaned closer, as if trying to read my face. His voice dropped lower, sharper. He said we shouldn't delay. He said decisions like this can't wait forever. The room felt smaller, heavier, tighter. He pushed the pen toward me again and said we should finish everything tonight. I looked at the pen Mark pushed toward me, but my thoughts were already somewhere else. Weeks back, where this story truly began. Nothing that happened tonight surprised me. Not really. I had been watching the signs gather like dust on shelves. I should have acted earlier. It started in February, when Mark asked if I ever lost track of days. He said it lightly, but his eyes stayed on me longer than the question required. A week later, Laura wondered if managing bills felt overwhelming lately. These weren't casual questions. These were probes. But this was only the beginning. I scheduled an appointment with my primary physician on February 18th. Full exam, blood work, cognitive screening. He said everything looked excellent for my age. He laughed when I asked about memory decline. I didn't laugh with him. On March 3rd, I visited a neurologist at the county clinic. Reflex tests, coordination, memory tasks, MRI, 40 minutes of precision. Results clean. No abnormalities. No cognitive impairment. I kept every report. Signed, stamped, dated. A week later, on March 10th, I met with a psychologist for a full cognitive and behavioral evaluation. She said I was remarkably stable and detail-oriented. I asked for written confirmation. She printed it while I waited. That's when I realized how deep this needed to go. I contacted Daniel Fletcher, an attorney I trusted for years. We met at his office on March 14th, Afternoon, 2:10 p.m. He listened without interrupting. Then he told me two things. First, if someone wants control, they will keep pushing until they break something. Second, prepare quietly. Let them expose themselves. I should have known he would be right. With his help, I reorganized every document I owned. Property papers, financial records, insurance, medical reports. I stored them in a locked metal box, and I added a second lock only I could open. But the most important step was simple. I installed a small camera in the dining room, no bigger than a thumb, angled toward the table. It recorded audio and video. I tested it 3 times. All perfect. Then I placed a voice recorder in my jacket pocket. Backup, in case anything failed. Preparation became routine. By late March, Mark's behavior changed. He started dropping by unannounced. Laura asked about my medications, even though I take none. They looked around the house with the eyes of people checking measurements. They didn't hide it well. That's when I understood the pattern clearly. So I waited, calm, silent, letting them think they controlled the timing, letting them believe I couldn't see the shape of their plan. Tonight, watching them hover over the documents, I realized something simple and solid. Everything was unfolding exactly as I expected. Mark's voice grew sharper. Laura leaned closer. Their confidence rose with every second of my silence. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know the entire evening was recorded. They didn't know I had medical proof in a folder inside my desk drawer. They didn't know I had been preparing for months. I folded my hands slowly. My pulse stayed steady. A quiet man with a quiet plan. I let them believe they were winning, because their fall needed to be complete. Mark leaned forward again, closer than before. His voice lost the softness it had at the beginning. He said we had talked enough. He said I needed to stop delaying. His tone changed in small ways, shorter breaths, sharper consonants. Pressure replacing patience. I stayed quiet. Quietness unsettles those who expect control. Laura pushed her chair slightly, scraping the floor. She placed her hand on the folder and slid it toward me with a firmness she tried to hide. She said they were only trying to help. But people who help do not force signatures. I should have seen this sooner. Mark tapped the table with 2 fingers. Slow, irritated. He repeated that I had been showing signs. He leaned back only to lean forward again, the motion of someone losing composure. He told me not to be afraid. He said confusion was normal. He said denial was common. But this was only the beginning. I watched his hands. Not shaking, but tense. He was waiting for the moment I would break. A moment he needed, not a moment I felt. Laura studied my face like she was searching for cracks. She found none. Mark exhaled loudly. A controlled breath meant to signal authority. He grabbed the pen and held out to me. Not placed it. Held it in front of my fingers. Close enough to touch. I didn't move. He forced a smile, but the muscles in his jaw didn't follow it. Laura stepped around behind my chair. She placed her hand lightly on my shoulder. A gesture meant to look supportive. The pressure was slightly too strong. A touch meant for guidance, but it felt like positioning. That's when I understood they had reached the next stage. Mark opened the folder wider. Page after page. Legal terms. Financial transfer. Property management. Power decision-making. He said we didn't need to go through every detail because it was all straightforward. That phrase always hides the opposite. Their patience was thinning. Their urgency growing. Laura told me I should sign now, while I'm still clear enough to understand. She said it softly, but the edge in her voice made the meaning sharp. She was losing control of her calm performance. I felt no anger, only confirmation. Mark moved the documents directly in front of me. He angled them, so the signature lines faced me perfectly. His voice lowered to a tone he probably used in negotiations at work. He said they had already arranged next steps once the papers were signed. I didn't ask what next steps meant. I already knew. The room felt smaller, their bodies closer, their voices quicker, their expressions tightening with every second of my silence. They wanted submission. They wanted fear. They wanted me to believe their story about my mind. But my mind was clear. sharper than theirs. Mark pressed the pen on the table, leaving a tiny click in the quiet room. He said we shouldn't waste time. He said he didn't want things to escalate. A warning disguised as care. I watched him carefully. He was on the edge of losing his mask. Laura's fingers tightened on my shoulder. Not painfully, but firmly, enough to show intention, enough to show desperation. That's when I realized the next moment would decide everything. I saw Mark's hand move toward me again, faster this time, and I knew something was about to break. Mark's hand reached toward me again, quick, unsteady, no longer hidden behind politeness. His fingers closed around my forearm with more force than before. Not enough to injure, but enough to show intention. Laura moved behind me, her voice thin and sharp, telling me I needed to cooperate before it gets worse. I stayed still. Stillness often says more than words. Mark pulled my arm closer to the pen. The motion was rushed, desperate. Paper slid. A glass tilted. Laura tried to stabilize the table, but her movement only added to the chaos. I should have known it would break here. Mark stepped forward. His knee hit the corner of the chair. The sudden shift jolted him forward, and his shoulder collided with mine harder than he meant. The impact sent my balance backward. My right hand reached out, but his grip on my forearm prevented me from catching myself properly. The floor came up quickly. My temple struck the edge of the wooden chair on the way down, a sharp, precise pain right above my eyebrow. Exactly the kind that leaves a thin line of blood, nothing more. The room tilted, then steadied, then tilted again. Warmth spread across my brow. Slow, controlled, not dramatic. This was the moment everything changed. Laura gasped. Mark froze for half a second. Then he forced out the sentence he'd prepared. He said I slipped. I pushed myself upright slowly. My vision clear with a slight delay, but my thoughts remained clean. No confusion. No fog. Only clarity. Laura rushed toward me with trembling hands, repeating the same lie too many times in a row. But this was only the beginning. I told Mark to call an ambulance. My voice didn't shake. That calmness forced him into hesitation. He looked at Laura. She nodded. They both knew not calling would look worse. Minutes later, flashing lights crossed my windows. Paramedics entered the house with steady steps. They asked what happened. Mark answered first, too quickly. He said I lost balance. He said I had been forgetful lately. He said this was not the first time. His eyes avoided mine. That was his tell. The paramedics examined me. Clear speech. Clear orientation. Clear memory. No signs of confusion. Only a small, controlled cut above my brow. One of them glanced at Mark as if measuring the truth in his words. I didn't need to say anything yet. They applied a small bandage, asked if I wanted to go to the hospital. I said yes. Calm, deliberate, as if I had already made this decision long before falling. I should have felt anger. Instead, I felt alignment. As they guided me outside, Mark stood in the doorway, pale and rigid. Laura hovered behind him, her hands clasped tight together, her chest rising too quickly. The ambulance door closed gently. The engine started. And on the way to hospital, I finally understood how the rest of my plan would unfold. The hospital lights were softer than the ones in the ambulance, but they still hummed with the same steady rhythm. A nurse cleaned the thin cut above my eyebrow and applied a fresh bandage. She asked if I felt dizzy. I told her no. My voice was calm, controlled, exactly the same as earlier. I should have felt shaken. Instead, I felt aligned. A doctor entered a few minutes later. He checked my eyes with a small flashlight, asked simple orientation questions. My name, the date, where we were. I answered all of them clearly. He nodded with quiet approval and wrote something on the chart. But this was only the beginning. He said the injury was minor, a small impact, nothing serious. He asked how it happened. Before I could speak, Mark stepped forward. He must have followed the ambulance here. He said I tripped. He repeated it carefully, the same rehearsed tone from earlier. Laura stood beside him, her face pale. She added that I had been confused lately. She overplayed the word. It sounded forced. The doctor looked at her for a moment too long. I stayed silent. Silence often reveals the truth faster than accusations. The doctor turned back to me and asked if their version was correct. I looked at him steadily. Then I simply said, I remember everything clearly. Nothing more. No drama. No accusations. Just the truth. That's when I realized the balance shifted. A police officer entered the room to make a routine incident report. He asked what happened. Mark rushed to answer again, repeating the story about my declining memory. The officer didn't react. He just kept writing. Then he turned to me. I described what happened in calm, direct sentences. No exaggeration. No emotion. I said Mark grabbed my arm. I said he pulled. I said I lost balance because of the sudden movement. I described the impact, the fall, the hit above my eyebrow. The officer's pen stopped for a second. A small pause. A sign of understanding. Laura tried to interrupt, but the officer lifted a hand slightly, asking her to wait. Her voice faded into silence. Mark's jaw tightened, but this was only the beginning of their unraveling. When the officer finished the notes, he asked if I had anyone to call. I nodded. I reached for my phone. Daniel, my attorney, answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, steady, familiar. I told him the situation in a few simple sentences. He said he would handle everything. He said I did exactly what I needed to do. He said he was already on his way. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt readiness. The officer handed me a copy of the incident report. He said more steps would follow. Mark tried to ask what that meant, but the officer didn't answer him directly. He simply said, "We document everything," and walked out of the room. A nurse brought discharge papers, clear instructions, a reminder to watch for dizziness. Nothing serious. Mark stood against the wall now, avoiding eye contact. Laura kept her eyes on the floor. Their plan was slipping. They knew it. They felt it. But they didn't know how much worse it would get for them. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't show emotion. He simply reviewed the medical papers, the incident report, and nodded once. He told me something simple, something quiet, something final. It's time to go home. And the moment he said it, I knew my real response was about to begin. Daniel drove me home in silence. Evening lights blurred in the windows, and the bandage above my eyebrow pulled slightly every time the car turned. I felt the ache, but it didn't distract me. Pain is simple. Clarity is sharper. I should have realized earlier that the real confrontation would happen here, not in the hospital. The house looked different when we arrived, not in appearance, in atmosphere. A heavy stillness hung inside, the kind that settles when someone knows they've gone too far and waits for consequences. Mark and Laura were in the living room. They froze when they saw Daniel walking in behind me. Laura's fingers curled into her sleeves. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but didn't form any words. Daniel stepped past me calmly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He placed a folder on the coffee table. Inside were copies of every medical report I collected over the last 2 months. The neurologist's evaluation, the MRI results, the cognitive assessment, all stamped, all official, all destroying the story they tried to build. But this was only the beginning. Mark stared at the documents as if they were written in a language he'd never seen before. His jaw tightened. His eyes shifted between me and Daniel, trying to understand the sequence of events he had clearly miscalculated. Daniel explained the situation in simple, professional sentences. The injury was documented. The false claims about my mental state were recorded. The police report was filed. The hospital confirmed my clarity and orientation. Then he said one line that made Laura's shoulders drop. There is no basis for any claim of cognitive decline. I watched their faces closely. Laura went pale. Mark's pupils tightened. That's when I realized they still didn't know the full truth. Daniel nodded once, and I walked to the corner cabinet. I opened a small wooden drawer where I kept a plain black USB stick. I placed it on the table next to the medical papers. The silence in the room grew heavier. Laura asked what it was, her voice thin, unsteady. I didn't answer. Daniel did. He said it contained audio from the dining room. Clear, high quality, time-stamped. Their voices, their pressure, Their lies, their attempt to force a signature. But this still wasn't the final blow. A knock on the front door broke the silence. 3 steady taps. Measured, precise. Mark turned his head. Confusion flickered across his face. He wasn't expecting anyone. Neither was Laura. She took a small step back, as if preparing for something she didn't understand. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt completion. Daniel opened the door. A licensed notary stepped inside, the same one Daniel scheduled earlier that afternoon. Clipboard in hand. ID visible. Calm, neutral expression. The kind of presence that makes lies collapse instantly. Mark's face changed immediately. The shift was sharp, sudden, undeniable. His confidence drained in a single breath. His posture dropped. His throat tightened as he swallowed. Because he understood. This wasn't a conversation anymore. This was evidence. Process. Law. The notary placed a document on the table. An official notice confirming my legal capacity. Witnessed and recorded. A document that nullified every claim Mark and Laura tried to fabricate. Laura whispered something, but her voice broke. Mark didn't speak at all. And in that silence, Daniel said the sentence that finally shattered them both. Daniel's sentence hung in the room like weight on a rope. He said they would both receive formal notice of investigation for attempted coercion. Simple words. Clean words. Words that removed any ground under their feet. Laura's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Mark stepped forward, then stopped halfway, as if the movement itself hurt him. His face was pale. His eyes flicked between me, Daniel, and the notary, trying to find a place where this reality wasn't true. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt distance. Mark finally spoke. His voice cracked on the first word. He said they didn't mean it. He said everything was misunderstood. His hand shook slightly. Laura stayed behind him. Her shoulders slumped, like she had already accepted the outcome. Daniel opened another folder. Papers. Official. Cold. But this wasn't the moment he feared. The real moment was mine. I told Mark, in a calm voice, that I filed a request for a temporary protective order. He blinked twice, slowly, as if the words needed time to register. I told him it would restrict him from entering my home or contacting me directly. He said I couldn't do that. He said it wasn't fair. He said he was my son. But this was only the beginning. Daniel placed a second document on the table. Confirmation that all financial access attempts were blocked. My accounts, my property, my documents, all sealed, all untouchable. Laura held her breath. I heard it in the quiet. Then I told them the last thing they didn't expect, the part they fear the most. I told them I updated my will. Yesterday, before dinner. Mark's expression collapsed in real time. Shock first, then disbelief, then something like grief. I felt nothing. He said I couldn't remove him. He said this was punishment. He said I was being manipulated. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't justify. I only said one sentence. I told him consequences arrive when people forget who they're talking to. He stepped forward again, but Daniel blocked him, calm and firm. Laura grabbed Mark's sleeve and pulled him back gently, as if she knew that one wrong movement would make things worse. The room felt heavy, still, finished. And then Mark whispered the last desperate line he had left. He said, "You can't do this to me." And I looked at him and knew exactly what I would say next. Mark stood in front of me, frozen in the middle of the living room, his voice cracking on the last words he managed to push out. He said I couldn't do this to him. I looked at him calmly. Then I finally said the sentence I had carried inside me for months. I said he earned it. The room went silent. Daniel didn't move. The notary watched without expression. Laura lowered her eyes, as if she couldn't bear to see the moment land. Mark blinked slowly, as if the words hit him 1 second too late. He opened his mouth again, but no sound came out. Not anger, not explanation, just empty breath. His hands trembled. His shoulders sank. Something inside him collapsed quietly, without noise. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt completion. Daniel handed him the official envelope. The protective order, the financial restrictions, the record of tonight's evidence. Mark didn't take it immediately. He stared at it the way someone stares at a door that is already closed. But this was only the beginning of the consequences. Laura finally stepped forward and took the envelope from Daniel. Her fingers shook as she held it. She whispered that they never meant harm, but her voice didn't carry conviction. It carried exhaustion, the sound of a plan dying in her throat. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to answer. Daniel opened the front door with a quiet, respectful gesture. No force, no drama, just a clear path outward. Mark looked at me one more time, not with anger, with something closer to the realization that he had misjudged the wrong person. He stepped outside. Laura followed. The door closed behind them softly, and that was the real ending. The following weeks moved slowly and cleanly. I returned to the routines I had ignored for years. Morning tea, short walks, organizing old boxes, repairing small things around the house that no one else ever noticed. Life became simple again. I should have felt lonely. Instead, I felt steady. Daniel handled the rest. Court filings, confirmations, updates. He kept everything quiet, efficient, almost invisible. The protective order stayed in effect. The investigation into coercion moved forward. None of it required my energy. Mark never came back. No calls, no messages, nothing. Only silence, a silence he created himself. One afternoon, I sat on the porch, sorting a small stack of papers. Among them was a childhood drawing Mark made when he was 7. A house, a tree, a man holding a child's hand. I looked at it for a long moment, then placed it back into the drawer, without emotion. People grow, people change, sometimes in directions you don't expect. Last month, I finalized my estate arrangements. Daniel brought the final documents, the new beneficiary list, the scholarship fund, the donation agreements. Everything clean, organized, purposeful. None of it included Mark. And that was the last decision he will never undo. Tonight I sat in my quiet home, a cup of warm tea beside me. The air still, the light soft. The healed skin above my eyebrow felt smooth under my fingertips. The world felt balanced. No noise, no pressure, no manipulation. Only peace, the kind I chose myself. It wasn't selfishness. It was survival.